As we've said, the larger lesson of this miracle in John chapter 2 is that Jesus turns disappointment into joy. The wedding is a picture of disappointment. Things didn't go as planned or as expected. Things were about to go south. And Jesus stepped in and redeemed the situation because as the wine ran out, he made more and better wine, and plenty of it, brought blessing into a very difficult situation. And that example we saw can apply to disappointment with religion and how Jesus turns disappointment with religion into the joy of a relationship with God. We also saw how that it applies to disappointment with life circumstances, the joy that comes from Jesus changing the circumstances just like he did at that wedding with the wine. But also biblically we understand that there's a joy that comes from Jesus not only just changing circumstances, but changing our heart attitude as well. Now, something that we have to think about is, where do disappointments come from in the first place? We live in a fallen world. God made it good, but now it's under a curse. And we read about that in Genesis chapter 1, where everything that God made was good. But in Genesis chapter 3, when the first human beings turned against God, now there's trouble in marriage, trouble in family, trouble in work. Life doesn't work the way that it was created to work anymore in this fallen world. And so it's naive to expect that life would always be what we hope or what we expect, or even maybe that it even often would be what we hope or what we expect. And I regularly have to remind people that, hey, we're not in heaven yet, and we should adjust our expectations accordingly, living here on this fallen earth. But that doesn't mean God is not at work. Often he does change the situation. We have many examples in the Bible of answered prayers where God changed disappointment into joy. 1 Samuel 1 talks about how Hannah was unable to bear children. She prayed desperately for a child, and God brought her a son named Samuel. In Luke chapter 2, we read about a man named Simeon who had been long praying for the Messiah to come. And in his old age, he was able to meet the baby Jesus as he went into the temple to be circumcised. And so Simeon's prayer was answered. His hopes were fulfilled. But as we already saw, both of those biblical examples also demonstrate that God met those hopes and erased those disappointments in his own purpose and in his own timing. But more often than not, God's purpose is not necessarily to change the situation, but to change us. Our character is always more important than our comfort or our convenience. And a constant theme in the Bible is that adversity has a purpose, that God uses difficulties in our lives to make us mature and complete. We see that in James chapter 1. It talks about joy and how we should consider trials of life to be joyful because of the effect that they bring about in our lives, that we might be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. And that would certainly apply not just to the adversities of life, but to the disappointments of life as well. And so we can assume that God will want to use disappointments in our life to make us more mature, to make us more like Christ. And that's ultimately where the joy comes from in facing things in life that don't measure up to what we thought they would be, that don't always fulfill our hopes and our desires. Now, I encourage you to take a minute and talk together about these questions related to the topic of disappointment. What are some of your greatest disappointments in life? If you feel comfortable sharing that, we encourage you to. But the important question to follow up on that is, how have you seen God change your attitude or change your heart in the face of those disappointments?